Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. This event is brought to you by the Institute of Advanced Studies and the Graduate Students Clubs of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, Computer Science, and Electrical and Electronics Engineering. My name is Shantanu, and I'm from the School of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, and I'll be your host for this talk on applied causality in computer vision by Professor Hanwang Zhang. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to post your questions during the webinar. And at the end of webinar, you'll also get to interact with Professor Zhang to ask your questions directly. Today's distinguished speaker, Professor Hanwang Zhang, is the Nanyang Assistant Professor in the School of Computer Science and Engineering at NTU. He obtained his bachelor's from Zhejiang University in China and PhD from NUS in 2014. Later, he did his postdoc at Columbia University and joined NTU in 2018. At NTU, he leads machine reasoning and learning lab, also Embryo lab. His research mainly focuses on the fusion of deep learning and reasoning for computer vision, such as visual captioning, visual dialogue, visual grounding, meta-structure learning, and so on. For his pioneering and fundamental contributions in the area of applied causality in artificial intelligence, he has received numerous awards, including the prestigious Singapore President's Young Scientist Award in 2021, and several Best Paper awards too. Without further ado, let's welcome Prof Zhang, and thank you so much for taking time off for this webinar. Over to you, Prof Zhang.
All right, thank you so much for Shaitanu's invitation and introduction. So it's my pleasure to introduce my field of research to all of you from a lot of interdiscipline majors, okay? So as you can see, the title is Applied Causality in Computer Vision. Here, the vision is the same as computer vision. And I think I have read some of you question is that what does applied causality mean? Yeah, applied means because before my work, I think like 5 or 10 years ago, all the causality works is a subtopic of statistics. So causality is mainly a theoretical statistical theory, and it be really applied in data science, or more specifically in some applied AI fields like computer vision, natural language processing, and deep learning. That's why I have the term applied causality. But if you have a better name for it, I'm all ears to accept your proposals. All right, so let's get started. And let's start from another student's question. It's about why do we need causality work? Can we learn causality from incomplete data? Okay, so first, why do we need causality? Because we want to have some immortal rules derived from the nature, from our daily lives observations, right? Because we want immortalities. Why do we want immortalities? I think that's a kind of our human nature. Right, so we always pursue something as will not be rotted away through time, right? We want to be invariant to time. So I think a lot of our human cultures, we have the worship for constellations, right? When we look up into the sky, our ancestors may say that, okay, our flesh will eventually decay, right? But how do I find something that is immortal, that can be passed to my generations after generations, right? So the stars in the sky, or the stars in the universe is immortal, right? So a lot of, the ancient philosophers, they study the rules for the planets, the orbits of the planets, right? So that's where does the science come from the ancient Greeks. But some human cultures, they may seek immortality from making mummies, right? So I think that's perfectly natural because for ancient Egyptians, due to their climate reasons, they can make mummies more in a easier ways, right? And in Chinese culture, we study the planet orbits only for the emperor's authorities. We use the rules of the stars to predict some of the authorities' futures, right? So that's why I think a lot of scientific historian, they discover that why the science is only discovered in ancient Greek people, right? So yeah, that's why we study causality, and that's why we study science, and that's why we pursue the immortalities, right? So study causality is trying to find some, cause and effect stable relationships among the observations. Right? So here is another example. So can we learn causality from pure data? Well, if you believe that the data is always, or if you consider the data is always complete, or you can always have data for free, then maybe yes, but this statement is like a tautology, right? Because everything is encoded in the data. But as you know that our, sensory data collection is limited, right? We cannot observe everything. Even if you use a microscope, you cannot discover DNA, right? So you need to use some electronic microscope to discover deeper inside the cells, right? So our sensory is always incomplete, limited. That's why the data collection is not always complete, right? So the next question is, can we discover causality from data or incomplete data? And the answer is definitely no. You can read the pearls, the founding fathers of causality, is that from his book, the Book of What, right? The first chapter is called The Mind is Always Over Data. So to study causality, you have to define your own causal model. And I think if you find some papers entitled blah, blah, causal discovery or causal discovery from blah, blah data, then that's with all my respect, it's a totally hoax, right? Because causality cannot be learned from incomplete data. So here is an example. The Kepler's law is a perfect data fitting for the planets, especially for solar systems planets orbits, right? The Kepler theory is an exact fitting of this data. However, does Kepler law implies any, the cause and effects? No, right? Because all the ingredients from the Kepler's law, they are just geometric measurements, right? So what is deep inside in this, the cause and effect? Here comes the Newton's law, right? So if we delve deeper into why do we have this angles, this, the angular velocities, the distance to the sense, we have the G, or it connects more fundamental physical measurement that the force and the mass, okay? So this is more fundamental, this is more causal, right? We have the cause of which is the force, and what is the cause of the force? The cause of the force is this mass. So can we go even deeper? Yes, of course. So Newton's law is, again, imperfect causality derived from the data, right? As you know now, the Newton's law is not perfect. We have the rather commutativity law or a more fancy the quantum, mechanics, right? So the pursuit of causality is always built by our beautiful humans' minds, and we build up a theory and we set up hypotheses and we use more data to testify our theories. So that's how we discover causalities. All right. And another thing about why Newton's law is stronger or more causal than the Kepler's law is that, so Kepler's law is a perfect example of data associations. So by data association, you can only predict the result inside this given data set. That's we call in machine learning called the in-distribution or IID predictions, independently identical distributed, right? Where the training data and the testing data are from the same distributions independently. But the Newton's law can discover or can perfectly predict something is all of this training data. For example, when Newton discovers the Newton's law, there's no satellites at all, right? We haven't yet sent our human beings to the moon, but by using Newton's law, we can not even predict, we can even, to intervene the nature. We can set up the new things, the new satellites into our Earth's orbits, right? So yeah, that's the power of causality. And let's see more examples and why learning from incomplete data does not derive causalities, or even though you have a perfect learning or you have a perfect data fitting of the observational data, it's not causality. Or if you have even constantly perfectly data fitting, it is not causality, right? So I always use this pigeon superstition as an example. So it's conducted by American psychologist called B.F. Skinner, and he have put many pigeons into different boxes. So as you can see, here is the behavior of one of the pigeon. All right, show you this. Hold on, let me. Yeah. So here is one of the pigeon inside the box.
The pigeon quickly associates the pressing of the
Yeah, and the pigeon will associate some of its
but when a timer
superstitious,
every 20 seconds,
like the flap, the wings associating with the open of the window, right? So it makes the pigeon believe that if I flap my wings, I can get my foot. But in fact, the opening of the window is controlled by an outsider, which is the experimentator, right? So actually the true cause is something outside the pigeon's observations, right? Because the outside controller is not controlled by the pigeons, and the pigeon will never see it. Right? So even though the pigeon derive a stable, constant, perfect fitting from the wing flapping and the window opening, but it is not causality. So that is a perfect example, right? So of course, why our ancestors can, defeat our, the creatures peers as peers were the why Homo sapiens is more superior than other, sapiens, right? Why? Because our ancestors discovered that even though our observation is limited, as you can see that everything is just a projection of the true outside world to this, wall. Everything you observe is just a projection, which is totally incomplete. But how do you approximate the outside truths? That's why we need causalities. We build a model a model is like, how do you measure the length of the wings, where you set up a mathematical model to interpret your data. And such interpretation is totally different from input-output fitting, which is always, you know, is a mainstream methodology in deep learning, which is not correct, right? All right, so based on this allegory of the cave, here's my own definition of what is artificial intelligence. So let's first define what is intelligence. Intelligence is like physics, right? We study the truth. We discover the truth out of the observations. From this simple falling apple observation, we can, you know, approach the very truth of the gravity wave, right? Or I think I strongly recommend you to read this popular science book, The Reality is Not What It Seems. So it's a journey to the quantum mechanics. And another thing, so similarly, we can define artificial intelligence. So the only difference is that this apple falling from the tree is encrypted or encoded as the data. So artificial intelligence should be identical to the natural intelligence, right? So I think this definition is only defined by me myself, right? You cannot see, where you will see some fancy definitions of AI somewhere else from many textbooks, right? They always use smart, intelligent, or blah blah lifelong learning, but I think artificial intelligence is nothing but the pursuit of causality. What is causality? Causality is the truth, just from the data. And this definition is especially, I think it has a far-reaching impact in the era of metaverse, right? Because you cannot build up a metaverse where you cannot believe something happening in metaverse if the AI in the metaverse is not using causality, right? If the AI inside this metaverse is just using the correlations, so all the conclusion they draw is just fake, right? So here I strongly recommend you to read the Bible of causality, the book of why. And if you want to delve into deeper in some mathematical formulations, then you can read this book. It's a textbook for year 3, year 4, or junior graduate textbooks. And then you can read the recent papers published in our book, and especially in computer vision and machine learning. Right? So that's my reading list for you to learn applied causality. All right, so what is causality versus statistics? You must be very familiar with statistics, right? Given input X and output Y, you want to learn a regression model. That's the first thing first, the first lesson you learn in statistics, right? But we want to do something different. And that's because in causality, we need to pay more attention to this dashed links. We want to know what is exactly going on in X and Y. So I will use several examples about, you know, some common failures of statistics. The first one is called the reverse causation. So a common example is that when you buy some luxury brands, let's say this Versace, this, you know, Gucci coat. So the reason why people buy luxury brands is that they assume that if I wear this luxury brand's clothing, then I will be as handsome or as beautiful as the model in the poster, right? So, but actually it's not the truth. The reason why the model wear this fancy clothes is handsome or beautiful, that's because they themselves a beautiful or handsome guy or girls, right? So this is a reverse cause and effect. Okay, so it's handsome lead to handsome, right? So the good looking lead to handsome, not because of what he's wearing. So you cannot reverse this causal effect. So that's a common tricks for the luxury brands marketing, right? You know that. And if you think the luxury brands marketing strategy is not essential, but here is a more essential one. That's the reason why we cannot trust Autopilot, even though the technology is a kind of mature, but it's not, it cannot be easily deployed in real life. Why? Because here is a common issue in Autopilot, right? So if you set up a camera and this agent is, you know, the shooting the observations of your pilot console, right? So if you train it more and more, the agent will wrongly associate the brakes, depressing the brake is caused by this braking signals, maybe the lower of the speedometers, right? So if some of the signals of the brake is wrongly associated with this brake action, then in the test time, if the agent sees a pedestrian, it will not brake because the agent does not see the brake signal yet, right? So this will make the car recklessly hit on the pedestrian, okay? So the more you train, the more data you train, the more disastrous software you will have, right? So that's not good. That's a reverse causations, right? So when you want to fit the data, so please be very careful about the cause and effect. All right, another failure is called confounder failure. And the first example is about the cosmetics tricks, right? So if you see that girl is always doing a face spa and the girl is young and beautiful, so if this, so is the reason of the girl being young and beautiful is because of the spa? Actually, you have to think about it, right? Maybe rich people or rich women may have the time. They don't need to work, right? They are rich, so they have a plenty of time to do the face spa in the whole afternoon, right? And mostly people from rich families are happier, I guess. So the good mood will make you, or your gene will make you younger and beautiful. So the direct effect from the face spa to the young and beautiful is questionable. And so that is a confounder effect. And we can see some more examples about this economic indexes, right? Some economic indices may, you know, they are definitely the positive, you know, proportional to some of the prices, or the stock prices or values in the market, but this is just an index. It might be from a spurious correlations. So here is a example about the number of the milk consumption and the Nobel Prize winners. Okay, as you can see that there is a clear positive correlation that the more milk you drink, the more possibility that this country or this nation will win Nobel Prize. But is that true? If you believe it's true, as a minister of the MOE, you will force every Singapore primary school student, they will drink 1 kilo milk per day, okay? And it is obviously insane. So sometimes positive correlation or negative correlation does not mean the true cause and effect, right? So if you still think this is no big deal, then we already have more confounder tragedies. So the first one is a Tesla's fatal accident. So at least we have like 3 to 4 accidents with the driver's head cut off. Why? Because the Tesla will recklessly drive into the big truck, especially white truck. Why? Because the vision model, because Tesla's scientists, they truly believe computer vision. But computer vision, today's computer vision, with all my respect, they learn nothing about spurious correlations. Why? Because in the training data, a lot of white stuff are in the sky. So white, they will consider the cloud as white features. So if they recognize something as white and the surroundings are blue, they will predict as the cloud. So the white truck will be misrecognized as the cloud. So it is a clear way to go. So it will crash into the cloud. Right. So that's totally a tragedy. Right? So, and another thing is the Boeing 737. As you know, that there is a software that forces the angle of the attack. If it is higher, then it will force this plane to dive. So this simple linear regression, but I'm sorry, I don't know what's indeed the design of this system, but I believe that mostly it must be a regression model. So this simple regression model, and it is tested by many physicists, right? By many specialists in the Boeing companies. So they should be expert, and they use fancy math to predict this, but again, it fails. Right? So correlation does not mean anything. It may indeed kill your lives, right? And another bias is called the survivorship bias. So here is the Second World War Spitfire fighters. So if you see the bullets here and you want to fortify the plane, how do you do? So here is two strategies. So each one may lead to different solutions. So the first one is, if you only make the statistics about the status and the returns, yes or no, right? You will make a wrong conclusion that the planes with fewer holes on its body may lead to the higher return possibilities, right? If it has many holes, then fewer of the planes may return safely. So you may derive a wrong correlation that I need to fortify the planes with many holes to reduce or to increase its return possibility. But as you know, it's incorrect. Why? Because you overlook this intermediate or the mediation effect. That's because if you have fewer holes, the fewer the probability that you have critical attacks, right? So the holes you receive, the more holes you receive, you will have more probability to receive the critical attack. And that's because of the critical attacks that make you return or not. Right? So therefore, these many holes only indicate that this host does not mean these positions are critical. So therefore, you need to fortify these non-hole critical positions, like the engines or the spider windows. All right, that's the mediation effect. So, and personally, I'm against Chinese medicines because I think most of the Chinese medicines are a hoax because they use the placebo effect to mislead the consumers. But I think some of the extractions of the Chinese herbs are indeed helpful because it has been testified by double-blind, the pharmacology's procedures, right? So, but if you only say that, okay, please take this GNC, PUC contains a lot of, blah, blah, nutritions or vegetable essentials, then you will be better. Then I think you did not remove the placebo effect from it. You did not remove this mediation effect all of it, right? So, so in daily life, so please pay attention to this kind of model. And another kind of bias is called the selection bias. In daily life, if you see that a man is dating with a beautiful girl, and if you observe that the man is not handsome, then you may have a wrong correlation that the man is very rich. So you may have a negative correlation between the good looking and the richness, right? So why? Because genetically speaking, we know that the handsome and the richness is independent, right? It's disentangled. But why do we have this correlation? That's because of the observational bias or the selection bias, because all the data you observe is given by this fact that the man is dating with a beautiful girl. So the same thing happens in that if you observe A+ grade students, so if you seeing that he's not working so hard, okay, and he must be smart. So working hard and smartness is a negative correlation. So that's another kind of selection bias. And indeed, working hard has nothing to do with being smart, right? They should be independency in a more general population. Like you need to do statistics with A-, B, F, B, all kinds of words. Okay. All right. So in summary, today's deep learning is nothing but like to fitting everything into a big table like this without considering the cause and effect. And therefore, I will say that the AlphaGo and DeepMind's or AlphaFold is nothing but a picking. So everything they learn, if your model is without causality, it is just a superstition. Okay, so it's nothing but spurious correlations. Okay, so why do you think why has it been okay for years? So here is my 3 personal opinions. The first one is AI research is not so demanding. As you can see that we don't believe AI doctor, and I think the government will never let AI to run the campaign for president, right? And we don't believe AI's teacher. So AI is only widely used in some entertainment fields, like you want to change the face or you want to make something dance in TikTok videos, right? So that's only for entertainment. And the second thing is that we are too humble. We don't think that if you can write a bubble sort algorithm is smart, but you think that playing a Go game is smart, but actually it's not, because playing a Go game is nothing but a data correlation game. But how do you develop a 100% accurate sorting algorithm is actually a very high level intelligence. Okay. And third reason is that for most of the time we're lucky, because for most of the time the correlation we learned appears to be causality. So it happened many times in history that let's say this English Dr. Edward, he knew nothing about the vaccination, theories like we do, but he just believed that the cowpox can be used or injected into human beings and it will cure the pox. Why? Because he just observed that the correlation between the cow milk female workers that close to the cowpox and who do not have the infected from the smallpox, right? So this positive correlation is falsely believed to be a causality, but fortunately, it is true. All right, so here is some summary of the associations. So learning from correlation is just a kind of summarization. It does not interpret anything, right? And if you only care about making predictions inside this training data distribution, then it perfectly works fine. But when you want to design an AI system, you always want to deploy it into some unknown scenarios, some out of distribution cases, right? So that's why we care about the global generalizations. If you want to find a theory and use this theory to also work on the Mars or on the moon, then you have to pursue causalities. So the correlation is no longer applicable, right? So like the Kepler laws cannot help you to send rockets into the universe. All right, so let's see some concrete computer vision examples, okay? So first thing is how to make the interventions, how to remove this confounder effect. So the first thing is to do is to intervene with the environment, how to passively intervene this environment and to pursue the true causal effect. So here I use an example of the pursuit of common sense. So what is common sense? So common sense, as its name implies, is so the visual means, of course, we learn some common sense from the vision, from the visionary visual data like images, videos, etc. Or what does common mean? Common means statistics, means correlations, means frequencies, right? And sense making is quite interesting. So sense making means make sense. What does sense mean? Sense means causality, right? Means reasonable, means explainable. So sense making means causality. So causality is a perfect definition for visual common sense. So I think some students from another field, they maybe you don't think that, oh, common sense is not defined in AI. Yes, it is. It's a very embarrassing thing, right? In AI, the AI scientists, they are familiar with, designing fancy models for something undefined, and they think it's perfectly natural, which is quite embarrassing. So with all my respect, common sense is not well defined in AI. So I think this work from our group is the first attempt to define a mathematical formulations for what is common sense. So common sense means some cognitive reasoning, some were particularly afforded. Like if you use a knife and you can cut the apples into two parts, right? If you cook this ingredients, you can make a dish, right? So that is common sense. So what if you do not care about common sense in computer vision, especially in this vision language tasks? So vision language tasks is a perfect example to visualize what the AI is learning. So here, if we train AI captioner, like the AI can automatically tell what's going on given an image, right? So if without visual common sense, the AI will just saying something very plain, like a dog is holding a frisbee, right? So you cannot say it's wrong, but a more accurate or more fruitful description should be a dog is jumping up into the air to catch a frisbee. Okay, so the second sentence is much better than the first one. Why? Because we know that a dog cannot hold something. People with hands can hold. So a dog should be, catch something with his mouth. But by common sense, we know that a dog should be jump to reach to the frisbee, right? The frisbee can fly, right? So that's why we can say that a dog is jumping into the air to catch the frisbee. And another thing is, like if the AI is saying that a plate of food on the table, so even though this description is correct, but the vision or the focus of the AI is wrong. The AI is focusing on this table area, but not the plate of the food when the AI is saying the word plate, right? So for human being, if you want to say that I see a plate, I need to make my eyes focusing on the plate, but not the table. Why? Spurious correlations, because in the training data, a lot of plates are placed on the table. So if you say the table, you say the place, you say the place, you say the table. So the AI will not distinguish between place and table. So that's a spurious correlation. That's not correct. So with common sense, you can see that when you say plate, you must focus on the plate. And here is another example about the VQA, right? So if you ask the agent if the girl excited to have a hot dog by giving image to the agent, right? So the agent will answer correctly, yes. But when the agent is saying yes, the agent focuses on the wrong area, the hot dog. So that's not reasonable, right? So how can a hot dog be excited, right? So the agent should focus on the boy, because by common sense, we know that only human being can be excited. Only creature, only animal can be excited, right? Not the hot dogs. And here is another example. If you ask the agent, is the person good at skiing? And the agent will look at this human being. Though it's reasonable, but if you want to say that good at some skill, right? The skill is skiing, you should focus on in a more fine-grained area, which is a leg, right? So, so by using common sense, we know that we people ski with our legs, but with not our entire bodies. Why the agent will focus on the coarse-grained human area? Because in the training data, only human beings can ski. So when you see the ski, there must be a person. When there's a person, there could be a ski, right? So that's a positive correlation, but it is not the cause and effect. All right, so how do we learn common sense? Some ancient works, they will try to use human annotations. They will annotate a lot of things, but you believe that it is prohibitively expensive, right? You cannot label anything, everything, right? So in this very pioneer work, they only annotate some of the cartoon images, which cannot be transferred to real images at all. So we pursue some, weekly supervised learning. Maybe we can only, use some, the free image text associations on the web to have a free training. Yes, indeed, we are doing with this. You must heard of the very popular word, the BERT, or some large-scale vision language pre-training, right? Like the DALL-E or the GPT-3, etc. So we are trying to, by fitting into a large corpus of image and text, and this is a weekly supervision. By weekly, I mean the word is not specifically associated to some certain regions, right? So you will train it as a whole. So that's a wiki supervised learning. And what you can get? You can get indeed a good explanations of some visual regions, right? But you will have some reporting bias, which does not imply common sense. So in most of the training data, the people will only say many people are walking on the street, or people drive cars, people ride bicycles, but they will not say that people are walking with legs. But for visual common sense, walking with leg is a common sense, right? And walking on the street is also common sense, but that's not fine grained, right? That's just an association of one thing with another, right? Or in a lot of books, you can read that people close the door, but you will not read people close the door with a hand on the handbar, right? So that's a reporting bias. So some cause and effects are missing in this large corpus, right? So in our sister community, in the natural language processing community, they are more successful than our computer vision scientists. Why? Because in natural language, it seems that the association is very common sense. Why? As you can see that this is the most simple word embedding. They just try to, use this yellow to predict its neighborhood. And this prediction model can generate some generate vectors for each word. And if you calculate the distance of each word, the kin vector minus the man vector, it will derive to something like kinship, okay? So the kinship, or this majesty stuff, plus a woman's vector, it will come to the queen's vector. So this is common sense. This is perfect common sense. So why in NLP field, by using these correlations, we can get common sense? That's because in NLP we learn from sentences, right? The sentences are just written common sense, because we human beings will write in a common sense way, right? In a sense making way. Otherwise, it's not written language, right? So I think so in the vision field, as you can see, by only learning from observations, you cannot learn the common sense. Why? Because the nature does not place everything, every visual regions in a common sense way, right? Because once an object is placed in this thing, the reason why we put something in this thing is missing, right? Do you know why we put a cat in the bed? Is the cat jumping into the bed, or someone put the cat into the bed, right? You don't know why. So, and you don't know why the ear should be above the eyes and the mouth. Why? You don't know, because the nature makes it looks like this. So if you apply the same strategy as NLP's correlation learning, you will learn nothing but spurious correlations. You will just learn that, okay, when you see a person here, then there should be a street. When you see a car here, there should be a street. When you see a wall, there should be a window. But it will fail in some extreme case that a wall without window, or a car drive in the flood, right? Or the car driving the desert, not in the common urban street, right? So here's what I define sense making, right? So I want to learn why object A cause object B. For example, if you see a person on toilet, I did not just learn the correlation between person and toilet, but learning the visual common sense about the person causes the existence of the toilet, and vice versa. The toilet causes the existence of the person. So some hidden cause and effect behind the scene, right? Behind the scene. So why does learning from this correlations between table and person where just two object is misleading? As you can see from here, that when you want to predict the existence, when you see a keyboard and a mouse, you will be confounded by this, context, by the surrounding objects like the table, lamp, and computer. So therefore, you need to get rid of this, the confounding effects from its surrounding objects, right? So therefore, you can apply the causal interventions by applying the do operators. So different from this posterior, as you can see from here, by applying Bayesian rule, as you can see here, so Z is a hidden surrounding objects, right? So by statistics, you only learn the Z is dependent on the observations. But in causal interventions, you insist that the Z is put by yourself. The Z is not controlled by anything else. Or this effect is not affected by the observations Z, right? So the X and Z is cut off. It means when you want to do the experiments to say X and Y, you will get rid of all the confounding effects. That's a controlled experiment. So here is a simple example. So Microsoft COCO is a common object data set. By using the annotation in this data set, we can have all right, so as you can see that the sink and hair dryer has a much higher correlation than the PY2X. Why? Because in the training data, if you see a hair dryer, a lot of hair dryers placed in the washroom, right? In the restroom. So in the washroom, there's the thing. But actually, seeing the hair dryer does not cause the existence of seeing a sink, right? So their PY2X, when you perceive the causality, is much lower. So here's another example that the toilet and person, when you see a toilet, seeing a person is quite low, it's as low as 0.1. But by common sense, you know that is right, it's not true, right? Because we human beings use toilet. So, but by pursuing PY2X, it is much higher, right? Because we can put everything into this toilet person relationship. So here is the reason why we have that due to privacy in the data set, we can see many few images with person and toilet, right? So that's why you have this posterior probability with 0.1. But if you pursue the causal intervention by placing every possible confounding environment inside this person and toilet, you will calculate much more accurate estimations of seeing a toilet indeed have a higher possibility to seeing a person because toilet can be used by person, right? So here is some of the architecture design. I will skip this because a lot of you is not from the computer vision field. But what I want to say that is by using this common sense, you can indeed improve some to make the agent more sensible. more explainable. Okay, so I will go to the next one. All right, so we have introduced the second letter of the pursuit of causality, and this is a very good, causal letter from Pro's book. So we will go up higher into the counterfactuals. So counterfactual is a more, sample specific, more advanced causality pursuit. We can use counterfactual to imagine unseen scenarios, right? So you can consider that intervention is a derivation of the Newton's law, but counterfactuals is the rocket launch to send an unseen object into the universe. Right? So I will use an example of mediation analysis. So let's talk about synthesis. How do you design the synthesis or compositions or some emotional feelings for AI? So here is an example. So when you see the two models for two beggars that with this given figure, which one will you give your money to? Which one? Of course, as a human being, we will choose this one because this one seems like a fake, right? A fake beggar. Why? How do you model this? How do you program this feeling into a agent? So here is an example. First, you need to construct a causal model, and this causal model may be learned by using the just discussed intervention, right? So by using intervention, you can learn a model like this. Here is just an example, like the wealth can lead to success, right? And wealth can lead to more healthy, status because you can buy very expensive medical insurance, you can eat better, you can live in a better environment, right? And the healthy body can lead you to success. So this is just an example of the possible causal models. And here the weight is higher. As you can see, the weight is higher because I do believe that health is much more important than wealth, right? So this is a causal model. Then I will perform example specific reasoning. So this is me, myself. If I'm rich and then I'm living a healthy status, then this is my own result, right? So I live a suck life like this. And if I imagine, what if I intervene this health status by using the lady on the left-hand side like this, okay? If I inject myself, I substitute her status into my status, I will have something like this. This is my result. So this is counterfactual. By given a causal graph, you can replace something anytime. So it's like when you want to calculate a new force, you can always replace the mass of a new object to have a new calculation of an unseen object, unseen scenarios, right? So this is a comparison between the fact and counterfactual. So that's why I successfully model the algorithm that to distinguish between counterfactual result and a factual result. And if you make that comparison, you will derive the feelings of sympathy, right? So here is a real example about how to delete or how to remove the bias from the language, right? In VQA or visual question answering, sometimes the agent is biased to the question text. If in the training data, if a lot of banana is labeled as yellow, so in the test time, if you see a green banana, it will it will answer the question by only the text-based knowledge without seeing the image at all, right? So here is a causal model. The Q is a question. The V is the image. The K is some visual attentions for the multimodal fusion knowledge right here, and A, the answer. So Q to A is a direct bias. That's not good because VQA, as its name implies, we want to pursue these paths, right? Q to K to A should be the result, or it should be the answer truly reasoned through the image and question altogether, right? So here we make the counterfactual for VQA, right? So we will make the agent to imagine a counterfactual work. So this is the factual work. When you see the text right here, what color are the bananas? And the fact is that the banana is indeed green. So due to the existence of the banana and yellow language bias, the yellow is quite high. So if you only predict based on the factual world, you will predict wrongly. The banana is yellow. But if you compare with your counterfactual world, in the counterfactual world, you will mute this image and only use the prior language bias. So if you make such comparison to the counterfactual world, as you can see here, that the yellow is also high due to the bias, but the green is not as high as in the factual world because you have muted the scene of the image. So if you make a minus here, it means a comparison, right? And you can get rid of the yellow effect right here. So the yellow effect will be quite low and green will comes out, right? So you will choose the counterfactual results right here, or the comparison between the fact and counterfactual result right here. If you use this as your predictions, then it's much better, right? So just modifying a simple line of code, you can surpass all the previous sodas. Go to the presentation. Let me see. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now is it the full screen view?
Yes, Prof.
All right. Okay, so I will skip this technical details and this visualizations right here. All right, so the last topic is where does this causal graph come from? If you have read my group's papers, you will see that in computer vision, a lot of the causal graphs are like this triangle shape. By triangle, I mean, this is the input, this is the output, and we have a confounder right here. And actually, when I submit all these papers, some of the papers were rejected because the reviewer think that, oh, this derivation of the causal graph is quite, not formal, and you need more justifications about that. Yes, indeed, that's true. And I think no one have mathematically proved that what does the causal graph should look like in computer vision. So here, I'm trying to use group theory to find a more profound, more insightful justifications for why the causal graph in computer visions are this triangle shape. Okay, so first we need to talk about the representations in computer visions. So computer vision is all about learning the representations or the knowledge from the observational visual data right here. So the representation is just a machine's vectors interpreting what you have captured, right? So this is representations. And by using some more mathematical or group theoretical definitions, it means that suppose you have a lot of verbs, okay? The verbs 1, verbs 2 to verbs n, And these verbs affect to some semantics, like the color, the shapes, or blah, blah, some attributes of the visual object. So these very high level, abstract level concepts will be encoded into a vector format, meaning you will find a corresponding or homomorphism of the verbs in this very abstract level to this very concrete pixel levels, and there is a one-to-one correspondence. And that's what we want to learn. And we have a property called decomposability of this. And another property about representation called equivariance means any vectors should faithfully reflect what's going on in the abstract level. For example, if you want to color the color from the red to green at this abstract level, then it is identical that you can first directly map the original red color into the pixel level and into the vector level, and then you use the vectors levels green painting G in this space, and you can change a red image into a green image in this way, right? From the abstract level to the pixel level, and then change the pixel level. So you don't need to necessarily to change from the abstract level first and then go to this pixel level. So this means every pixel level change corresponds to abstract level change. That's called equivariance, right? So that's the requirement of learning representations in computer vision. So what does this imply? It means, so this group theoretical definition is very important because this is the first time that we change from the static definitions of representation into the more dynamic way, because we specify what's going on in this, the dynamics of this visual works, right? So here are some of the previous, common tricks in learning representation. So 2 decades ago, we use the handcrafted features like the seed or the surf. Like we use some image processing priors to take the derivatives of the pixels intensities, and we can have this, the so-called invariant, scale invariant descriptors. And this is nothing but like we have injected our human priors into this, equivariant procedures, right? And then we can also encode this images into the vector or the vector space. So here is a vector space. So in the GAN sort of works, I think some of you may heard the GAN, right? The generative adversarial networks. So if you impose some of the independence for disentangled priors into these vectors, you will make it a very good representation. But again, it is a human prior knowledge injected into these vectors. And or you can pay money to invite the actors and you collect the data into different, controllable attributes. Like you can use a money talk, right? To let the actors to turn his face from degrees to degrees. Then you have a face data set. So this is again to use the human priors to make the interventions of the data. So your data set will reflect the dynamic. And of course, for this video data set, you will play different actions into different things, where the dog's image of different breeds, different color, different context, and so on. Or in the self-supervised learning, you don't have the class labels, but you can always use some Photoshop to augment a single image into different colors, different crops, the flips, or any kinds of organizations. So this is how we collect the training data. So if we abstract what's going on in this, the whole history of data collection, you can observe that if we can have a verb or some of the interventions noted as G, and we consider that this G is active, where this group element is active on a sample. And all the actions you want, or all the actions where you can consider the G as a gene in biologists, right? So different gene may correspond to different proteins, and different proteins might correspond to different, appearance, right? So this data collection can be considered as the orbit collection for a group set, right? So for a phase data set, you can consider that for given identity, all its image corresponding to this identity is like orbit changing its fields, and so on. Like for these dogs, it's like a group changing its shared attributes from different fur, different background, different poses, and different breeds. So this identity changing is like a cross orbit change, right? So here is a more detailed definitions. So the orbit and partition is a very common, definitions in group theories books. You can find it in any abstract algebra textbook. So given a subgroup means given a shared attribute. So what does an object should have about some shared objects? So these shared objects will, these shared attributes will always partition your data set into a disjoint subset. It means that you don't even need humans annotations. This data set will be automatically classified or categorized due to this underlying group dynamics. So it will partition all your data sets into disjoint orbits. Each orbits correspond to the transitions by using these shared attributes. And what about the cross orbit 1, orbit 2? What about this cross transitions? It's like when you play the Heart of Stone, means like turn some image into shape, or turn some image, turn some sample into a specified class. So that is the whole picture about the dynamics of the training data. So the training data is just a reflection or a projection of the underlying, the groups or the truths, okay? So this is the first time of the group view of the supervised training data. As you can see, given the training data and given a subgroup, you can always have a class. So this is the first time in the machine learning literature we define what is a class, okay? If you learn machine learning, you will always see that, a training set is given a label, and a lot of training data corresponds to its label. That is the definition of a class, but it is just a description of a passive observation. It is not telling you the underlying dynamics. So here is the underlying dynamic. So by giving this underlying dynamics, we can have this triangle shape like this. So the subgroup is like the shared context, the shared attribute, which is, surprisingly and interestingly, it is a confounder. And together with the quotient group or the class, you can just consider it's a class. Given a class, given a shared attribute, you can always augment, or you can always generate a sample turning from X to the goal X prime. So what about the label? The label is just a judgment, a binary judgment of if you reverse the shared attributes here, right? With the reversed group actions, the inverse groups, whether this reversed X prime H minus 1 is equal to X. So if X is a class template or it's a generic dog, and if given a specific dog, if you can reverse back to this dog template, then this image X prime is a dog. So that's the reason why we have this. And that's the reason why, for the first time, we use group theory to find out the cause of the causality. So I think it is a kind of the matter physics of the current causalities. So by given these definitions, I think I have many, ambitious plans to do. The first one is I want to design a machine genome project, because current deep learning is too expensive. Like different companies may train their own big data and they never publish or they never share their big models. But I think if we can disentangle to find out all the hidden group elements that generate this data, then we can consider that each element is like the gene for a biological object. So here we have a gene for each observable visual object. So we can have a machine genome project to disentangle everything into controllable interventional features. And if every feature is disentangled, we can always build a causal graph upon that. Otherwise, causality is still just a hoax, right? And then by using this disentangled features, we can totally redefine the major optimization method called the stochastic gradient descent. And I don't think this is good, because although it is from the Taylor expansion, from the first order gradient descent, but the learning objective is the loss function is still based on correlation, which is not correct, right? So we need to design 3 different layers from correlations to interventions to counterfactuals. So given a complex task, our loss should be defined in a counterfactual form. And this counterfactual form can be reduced to a lower level interventional form, and then lower level correlation-based loss. And then by using this loss, we can use the SGD. So we need to further wrap up the current SGD, the most primal form of SGD, into a more complex format called the recourse. We don't only predict something, but also tell what's going wrong, what's not predictable, and how do I do something to change my predictions. All right, so that's all. I'm sorry for my 20 minutes delay. So here is the summary and highlights. Like the Julia Pearl's book saying, the causality is a new science. It is not only learning from data, and causality is a theory that is falsifiable. It is not a black box. You can always find a case that falsifies, right? And causality should be a revolution to make us rethink everything in deep learning. And causality is not specified. It's not so the model here means neural architectures. It is not specially designed for a certain neural architecture. So it should be neural network agnostic. All right. And I think my distribution is why I call my work applied causality. I make the causality first work in our computer vision community. And that's all. Thank you. So now it's a QA session.
Dear Prof Hanwang Chang,
Yes.
thank you so much for such a nice presentation.
Thank you.
And we shall now move on to the Q&A session.
All right. So
Okay.
I can see 4 questions.
Right.
I will start by one.
So the first question asks so the first question posted is, how are Kepler's laws less causal than Newton's laws? Because they both of them just seem to be 2 models based on observations, though with different explanations. And more importantly, when do we stop and say that this is indeed the cause?
Yeah, so I think that, yes, you're right. Kepler's law, the first Newton's laws is not the true cause and effect, right? Because our physics still developing and we are far to reach the God's mind, right? So, but the reason why I say Kepler's laws is less causal than, I think the question is missing.
Sorry.
The reason why Kepler laws is less causal than Newton's laws is because by using Newton's laws, we can do some unseen predictions. Okay, we can make something that is not even existent in the solar systems. And that's why I say Newton's laws is more causal, means it can generalize to unseen, generalize to some imaginative things, right? And the second one, I really appreciate your opinions on current computer vision developments and how sometimes implying correlation. You also mentioned the computer science not building into models. Why we need humans influence causal models? On that note, sometimes humans can be wrong about computer science. How can we generalize causal? Well, I think that's too complex. It's a paragraph of questions.
Right.
So I will first answer why. So we human beings can make mistakes, right? And why do we, prefer humans' mistakes than machines maybe choose? Well, I think that's because even though we human being makes mistakes, the mistakes are explainable. So explainability is very crucial for deep learning models for AI's deployment. Otherwise, when the AI did something bad, you need to explain it. You need to fix it to find out why it's being a mistake. And then we can fix it to prevent not happening again, right? And maybe another question, reinforcement learning has been used by demand for, I wonder what's your take on using. Well, I think reinforcement learning is a must for learning causalities because reinforcement learning has a very good, theoretical framework to let the AI to interact with the environment. But the crux here is that reinforcement learning, current reinforcement learning is still based on learning correlations. Therefore, we need to modify the reinforcement learning into a causal way. And I'm working on that. Yeah.
Okay, so is that all for this question?
Yes.
Okay, so I think we should move to the next question in that case.
Yeah. From Song. By adding the vector given season, can we say it's by adding the vector addressing the season, can we say it's okay? Well, I think maybe it is yes, but particularly for our models used in that paper or in that work, we did not making this, seasonal based, mechanism there. But I know what you mean. So you might wonder whether our model is too good to be true to counter any kind of bias. Well, yes, your concern is reasonable. Well, I think in general, a model is not that good because we cannot always disentangle the features. So if you cannot disentangle the features, you cannot apply causal weapons, right? So in the counterfactual VQA case, the language feature and visual features are naturally disentangled because they are trained from different training data. So they are naturally disentangled. So we are fortunate to make the model work. So in general case, it will not work. So that's why in the third topic, I propose to disentangle features, right?
Okay, so I think
Gabriel,
yeah.
Thank you for your interest. How would you select for intervention while for generating? Well, that's a quite specific question. So I cannot guarantee, but it is heuristics that if you apply some of the basics visual processing toolbox, like changing the colors, you do not change the semantics, right? So that's why for the augmentations, we cannot make some very, big augmentations, like change a dog from a dog to a cat, right? So I think this flipping or color change does not affect this. And from Wang Jinglong, could you share some suggestion about detecting or object abnormal vibrations through applying video analysis? This happened. Yeah, actually, I think one of our recent work is based on noise detection. How do I pick up the data that is a noise, right? So I think a noise is a kind of abnormal data, right? So my approach is first we need to so we cannot rely on the given data statistics because it's just the correlations. So these correlations may encode some of the useful data, semantical distributions. Like if your data set is very long-tailed, means that if you have most of the data is just common objects, but only a few training examples per class for this tail class, like very rare animals, very rare products, like the PS5, right? So in that case, if you just make a statistics of your training models, let's say the predictor of the very rare examples is itself not stable, right? So if you consider this as a noise identifier, that if its prediction is not stable, then you consider it's an abnormal datum, then it is not true, right? So we are going to learn a causal relationship between the visual features and its labels, meaning these visual features is invariant to its context change. So by context change, I mean maybe it's dominating by some certain kind of context associations, like the fish is always in the blue sea context, where the label prior of the rare animals is quite low, right? So by removing such context change, you can obtain a very causal effect visual feature correspondence, and that's causal. So this causal relationships can be used to robustly predict. So if this causal relationship prediction has low confidence, then it must be abnormal. Right? So I think that's a quite detailed approach, and don't review it because the paper is still under review. Okay. The next one, could you further elaborate how the causal model can help improve explainability as the causing is not to that? Well, model expandability is a very big topic. So I think the causality is the first step, because by using only causal model, you can make something fixed. You can tweak or toggle some of the parts of the model, right? The model is no longer a black box. And that's why you can fix or change the predictions of the model as you wish, right? So that's only the first step. So if you can achieve this first step, then you can design a human understandable interface. Like you can translate this fixations or this tweaks into natural language, and then people can read it. And this readings is natural language based, so that's explainable. So my opinion is that today's expandability research, like to illustrate the visual attentions of the model, is not well defined. I think in the future, expandability is only a matter of symbolic translations. Okay, we make some symbolic interventions of the model, and we translate this symbolic interventions of the model into a human's language. Or I think the model's mind is not necessary, or the machine's mind is not necessarily at the same as our human's mind, right? We human beings are born and raised by, the carbon-based stuff, but machine is not carbon-based, it's silicon-based, right? So how the heck we need to constrain the machines into our human-based knowledge? No need, right? So all we need to do is to build a causal model for the machines and then translate the machine's culture into our human's culture. Okay. The last one is heard you speak a few times before. Love it. More question here. What is your view on natural effects on? Well, I think it is not a kind of natural effects. It is still based on humans prior, right? It is still based on human prior. How do I put it? So maybe the true humans, the true machine's nature, or the true God's mind is not as simple as possible. It might be quite, complex. But if you want to make it human interpretable, we humans' mind is quite energy efficient, right? We cannot memorize a lot of things. So our humans prior is only try to conclude things as simple as possible. So I think the Occam's razor's prior knowledge is just designed for our human beings. It might not be the natural effects. Okay, so and I don't think that's a future of AI. It's far from the future of AI. So Occam's razor is just a human's pride. Okay.
Okay, so it seems the questions that were posted have all been answered. So I'd like to ask the attendees one last time, if they have any more questions, they can ask it now.
Yes, and as you know, you can always email me.
So if there are no more questions, then we can conclude our talk here. And once again, thank you, Prof, for this interesting talk.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend ahead.
Prof Zhang, thank you so much for taking time off of your busy schedule and giving the talk. And lastly, I would like to thank all the participants who joined us today in this webinar. Before you guys leave, please do scan the QR code for the survey as well as for the attendance. We value your feedback as it will help us to improve our future webinar series. Once again, thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great weekend ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Prof.
Bye, Prof.